One woman is on a mission to bring her rape ordeal to President Cyril Ramaphosa's attention. Anglican priest Reverend June Dolley-Major says another priest raped her in 2002. Today, she will be handing over a memorandum to the office of the Presidency in Pretoria. But let's bring you that discussion with the Reverend herself. She joins us via our video link this morning alongside Senior Pastor Reverend Zakes Jali. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning. Reverend Dolley-Major, I want to begin with you this morning because it is so important that you tell us about your ordeal that dates back as far as 2002. What happened?
Morning, Michelle. Thank you for having me. Just one correction. I'm based in Cape Town. So I'm actually going to be handing it over at Tynehase this afternoon.
All right. Thank you very much for that.
So yeah, I was raped in 2002 in Makanda, which was then known as Grahamstown, and that is where the Anglican seminary is at. And I was accepted to be ordained as a full-time priest in the Anglican Church of Southern Africa in Cape Town Diocese. And I went there to find a school for my son, and I was accompanied by two others. It is my rapist, and I am allowed to say his name on air because High Court order allowed it, and it has been said. So I was accompanied by my rapist, Melvin Boyson, who's a priest at the time and also still a priest up until today, as well as one other person who's also ordained. It was there on the property of the Anglican Church Seminary where I was in fact raped. And coming out and telling my bishop about it at the time, he silenced me, basically telling me that I took a vow of canonical obedience to obey my bishop and his or her successors, and I need to protect this institution, which is the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. And of course, newly ordained, we obey our bishop. And it took a long time. It was actually a few years, and within that silence, I experienced a lot of pain. I experienced a lot of nightmares. It was just horrendous. And it was only when a family member told me about his daughter being raped by a family member of his, and I said, she needs to report it. And he said, no, but what about the family's name? It was in that moment that I realized that I was being a hypocrite. That if I'm telling somebody to report it and not protect a family, but rape is rape, then I should do the same. And it was then when I actually reported the rape. And it was in coming out very public with my story that I soon discovered so many others have been raped over the years, and mostly boys for decades. And that is the reason for today's handover of memorandum.
I'm so sorry that happened to you, Reverend Dolley-Major. I want to bring in immediately Reverend Zakes Jali, because it is so incredibly disturbing that was the response that she was met with back in 2002 when she reported the rape to the bishop at the time, Reverend.
It is a very sad story indeed. And the sad thing is that she's only one of too many who've suffered such in the church setup. However, I am of the view that the church has inherited a wrong habit of trying to manage crime within the church setup. Reverend Dolly, I'm sure as a Bible scholar yourself, you would know that this is not new. It had happened even during biblical times. And the prominent case you can think of is a case where King David raped Bathsheba. And as much as he had all the counsel around him and all the men around him, counting only his sons, he had 19 sons, by the way. And then he had the woman he raped, her father was one of his advisors. So he had so many people around him, but none of them yet took him to the task until such time that God commissioned Prophet Nathan to go and confront him. Now, that unfortunately has been happening in the church. Someone gets raped or victimized in one way or the other, and what we do, we call a meeting. That is not how crime is solved. That is not how we deal with such things, because what it does, it actually exposes the victim to what is called secondary victimization, or should we say second rape, because unfortunately any institution by virtue of it being hierarchically in a manner, they will tend to protect the accused, who is usually someone of more prominent or senior position. So we need to go back to the reality that rape is a crime, and there's nothing spiritual about it, Reverend Dolly. What needs to happen when someone is raped is what I do with my church. I told my church members in Western area, Bureau Fellowship believers, that you get raped, we don't call a pastor, you call the cops. I only get called to go and pray for the accused if he's our church member, and then support the victim throughout the course. So the fact that such cases are dealt within church tribunal, that was a very wrong call by the leadership of the church to try and resolve the matter among themselves, because none of them have got the expertise to deal with that. It should have went straight to the courts and should have been dealt with it by that time. Well,
the route taken at the time, Reverend Dolley-Major, and you will attest to this, is quite different to what Reverend Jali is outlining there. In fact, when you reported the matter to a fellow bishop, you were encouraged by the church not to lay a criminal charge, which, as you've told us already, you listened to, you obeyed it as an instruction from your church. A hearing that then went ahead with senior clerics declaring that no rape had occurred, and then a digital judgment handed down last October by retired Bishop Peter Lee found that the priest accused was not guilty of sexually assaulting you, and that there was no evidence of you informing your bishop before 2016, no corroboration of your story. You also tell us, Reverend Dolley-Major, that your rapist is still practicing in the church.
Correct. So thank you, Reverend Jali, for that. However, in the case of children, for example, who are being raped, and the reason why I went very public with my story is because people always say, why the silence when somebody comes out years later? And it's because of the vilification and the victim blaming, the body shaming. And I purposefully went very public with my story so people can actually see what happens when you do break the silence. And to me, it was break the fear and then break the silence. And so I waited nearly 2 decades. Honestly, this year is 20 years since it happened. Last year, the tribunal took place. After 2 hunger strikes, I physically had to put my body through 2 hunger strikes to get the attention of the Archbishop to do a tribunal. And after I was raped, a few years after that, this very same priest was caught on video camera sexually molesting the secretary of the parish where he was at. And it was given to the bishop, this evidence, this video evidence, but it was covered up. And so the tribunal happened, and when retired Bishop Peter Lee was chosen to be president of this tribunal, I knew for a fact that they're going to find him not guilty, because the very same bishop was also president of another tribunal where a male priest, in fact, a few years ago, came forward. He was also a rape survivor as a child by a priest, and he then named publicly some pedophile priest within the church. That time, social media wasn't so up and coming, so he did it via emails. And Bishop Peter Lee then defrocked him and said that he brought the church in disrepute by going so public with the story, and that he broke his vow of canonical obedience. So when Bishop Peter Lee was chosen, I knew for a fact that they're going to find him not guilty. And I actually thought he would defrock me as well, which he did not do. But going very public, of course, the church did that on YouTube Live, and again, you could see how a survivor got treated. And I thought, because do the process, give the church the benefit of the doubt, and see if it's a safe space for these boys who have been raped and these girls to come out, who are now adults. But it was horrendous. The tribunal was not safe. It was not inclusive. It was anything but safe. And it was exactly like a criminal court. They ripped me apart. Similar to the Omotoso case, which in case, in event I was warned by Safe and Inclusive Church that they cannot protect me if they do an Omotoso on me, which they did. And my divorce came in from my domestic violence abuse in my marriage, the abuse on my minor child. All of that came in, which had nothing to do with the rape. When I made reference to that video recording, Bishop Peter Lee told me that I cannot bring that up because no criminal charges were brought against him. And when his marriage came into question, Bishop Peter Lee stopped it and said, that's very personal. So the video proved that he's a sex pest. And so it was very clear from the start where Bishop Peter Lee was going. At the start, he silenced me, and I put that video on Facebook as well. He blatantly said, you must be quiet. You have no voice here. So I had no voice from the start. So this is it. And the very bishop that told me to keep silent, the very same bishop that suspended Reverend Melvin Boyson for sexually molesting the parish secretary, then testifies on Melvin Boyson's behalf at the tribunal. So it was nothing safe. And so Bishop Peter Lee was not there. So he cannot declare someone not a rapist. It was clear where he stood from the start. He protected the institution.
And a very different handling of the situation when it comes to how men and women, how the perpetrator and the victim is treated in a tribunal of that nature. To both of our guests, thanks very much indeed for joining us on this incredibly important issue. Of course, Reverend June Dolley-Major, what you're now wanting from the President is to have a commission of inquiry into sexual offences committed by the clergy across all denominations set up, and you're handing over that memorandum to President Cyril Ramaphosa in Cape Town at Tainhays today. Reverend Zakes Jali, let me also thank you for weighing in on this very important discussion. And let me just say, for the sake of our viewers, that we have also reached out to the South African Council of Churches to get its response on this story. And this is the official response we've received from the SACC. I want to read out the first paragraph of the response that we received. It says, each of the member churches of the South African Council of Churches has its individual protocols to follow when complaints of sexual misconduct are lodged against any of its ministers or its leaders. It goes on to say a number of other things which we don't have time to read word for word here, but really worrying response from the South African Council of Churches, not mandating churches to, as Reverend Jali has just outlined, approach the police immediately when there are instances of rape and sexual assault in the church, but rather saying that each church has its own protocols to follow when there are complaints of sexual misconduct. Very worrying indeed.